The junta in Niger remains defiant after ignoring the deadline to reinstate the president issued by the Ecowas. In the latest development, former Finance Minister Lamine Zain has been named the new Prime Minister. The international community, including the United States, is urging for diplomacy as the best way to deal with the coup in Niger. And on the other hand, delegations from Mali and Burkina Faso's military governments arrived in Niger on Monday in a show of solidarity with the coup leaders. Now, to discuss this further, we have with us Mr. David Otto, Director for Geneva Centre for Africa Security and Strategic Studies. Sir, thank you once again for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, sir, the junta has appointed the new Prime Minister. How will this impact the stability of the region and relations with the Ecowas?
Well, it demonstrates that the military junta is moving forward, assuming that, it has consolidated its position. The issue is that Ecowas, gave an ultimatum that expired on the 7th, that is 48 hours ago. And Ecowas is going to meet tomorrow in Abuja, Nigeria, which is a neighboring state, to decide on what steps. I think Ecowas has three options. One is to ignore the military junta and allow it to continue with its appointments and run as the new de facto government. The second option is for ECOWAS, to continue with mediation and negotiation. And the third option would be for ECOWAS to launch a military intervention. So I think these three options, might be what ECOWAS would discuss and see what would be the pros and cons, to change the situation in Niger. But what we also know, I have to add, is that Niger has also been making some networking. It has now joined forces with neighboring Burkina Faso, neighboring Mali, which are now supporting the move that ECOWAS is making. In addition to that, the population seems to be behind the military junta. So it's a bit of a complicated issue for ECOWAS and the regional partners at this point in time.
Right, so that being said, the Russian footprint has been eminent all through the rallies in Niger. We've seen Russian flags being waved as well. Now, what can you tell us about that?
We haven't seen, Russian machinery yet. We haven't seen any boots on the ground from Wagner forces. But what we have seen is that in defiance of the presence of France, we've seen protesters calling for France to exit Niger, and we've seen protesters raising the Russian flag, some kind of insinuating that, Russia would be the better partner. So this has been a pattern, which, we've seen in the case of Mali and Burkina Faso. It does show that, there is a possibility that ECOWAS members could split into two factions. Ones that would want to have Wagner forces in their countries, to protect the military regimes, and one that would want to have maybe the Western, partners on their side. So we are likely getting to a point where we could see the Sahel representing some kind of a proxy war in the region for the East and the West. And this is, the lines are being drawn, and the lines are getting thicker by the day.
Right, so now delegations from Mali, Burkina Faso arrived in Niger as well. They've expressed solidarity with the junta. You mentioned this as well. What's your take on this?
Well, it makes the situation more complex, in terms of resolutions. Right now, since the Niger junta has friends, in the case of Mali and Burkina Faso, who have, gone there to consolidate the position of the junta, it makes the junta to have more, acceptance, within the population as well. And this makes it very difficult for ECOWAS to launch any military intervention, because effectively it will be a war between not just Niger, but other members of ECOWAS, including Mali and Burkina Faso. Algeria seems to have condemned any military intervention. But I think what is more disturbing is the fact that most of the West African member states do not want to see any military intervention as the solution. They believe that a military intervention will make matters worse. A military intervention would only benefit countries that supply weapons, and this means, the Western nations and perhaps, Russia or China would benefit from this. It will not be in the interest of the region, for an escalation of the crisis. I think some people have even said that there is no guarantee that an ECOWAS military intervention will restore President Bazoum, because they don't have control over him, and there is no guarantee that the population will support them. And this is where I think ECOWAS has to make a very strategic decision to ensure that it achieves its mission. And perhaps maybe they can go for more negotiations, but we don't know yet. We'll wait and see.
Right, sir. Now, after the junta rejected ECOWAS's demands, you mentioned this as well, West African leaders, they're preparing for a summit on Thursday. What can we truly expect? What options do you think they're left with?
I think at this point in time, based on the atmospherics, what people are saying in the region, what civil society organizations, religious entities, a lot of people are encouraging ECOWAS to shield its sword and avoid any military confrontation or intervention. Now, the problem with ECOWAS is that ECOWAS wants to see that the coup that is happening in the continent, and especially in West Africa, stops. And they need to show some level of, hard lines, and this is why perhaps ECOWAS, introduced the fact that, they could carry out a military intervention to act as a very strong deterrent. But the problem is, nobody can determine how this war will be fought. A lot of Nigerians who share border with Niger Republic are saying that, an attack on Niger will be an attack on a brotherly state. They talk about the issues, of, common heritage. They talk about issues of the fact that, there's going to be no guarantee that, soldiers will go in there and achieve their mission. So the drums of war seems to be beating quite low at this point in time. So I guess that on Thursday, what ECOWAS might be looking for is perhaps to increase the level of pressure on Niger to kind of form a transitional government and institute a democratic process. But the big problem with that is that the Nigerian junta seems to be having more and more support from the population. The more ECOWAS talks about war, the more they have support. So it's a very challenging time, to see what ECOWAS will do, and if the junta will accept any of the demands which ECOWAS will make.
Right. In fact, I was just going to come to this, sir. On the other hand, we've seen that students in Niger's largest university, they say that they are ready, that they are in fact supporting the coup leaders. What would you say are some of the reasons that has led to this vehement support for this military coup in Niger?
I think one of the obvious reasons is that, ECOWAS, somehow by giving the 7 days ultimatum, threatening to use military intervention, that has rallied a lot of Nigerians who see this as, some kind of foreign intervention. They see this as the hands of France or the European Union pushing ECOWAS, to launch a military intervention only for them to benefit. They don't see any military intervention as a benefit to the people of Niger. So a lot of the Nigerians have now rallied. Even some of the people who supported President Bazoum and asked for him to be reinstated, a lot of them are now turning against this idea and saying that this is an anti-colonialist resistance. They are fighting against the hands of the West, by all possible means. So a lot of people in Niger Republic have now joined, the support for the military. They're simply saying that, the military can take away the French equation. They can allow the Western states, to leave the country, and then for them to have new partners. So I think the ECOWAS ultimatum has backfired. But also I think, timing, especially with the support of, countries like Burkina Faso and Mali, and also the support of other sister security agencies in Niger Republic. That timing has meant that ECOWAS has lost the window that it could intervene, because, of course, it did not have a standby force 24 24 hours just after the coup. So it's a very challenging time. And without the support of the people of Niger, any military intervention will be a disaster for ECOWAS.
Right. Now, that being said, meanwhile, multiple terrorist attacks have taken place in Mali and Burkina Faso over the weekend, as per reports. What is your assessment of the security situation in the wider region, not just in Niger?
What is happening is, as all these countries in the Sahel who face ISIS and Al-Qaeda factions, within their areas, as they get distracted, on this military coup crisis, on who to support, the jihadist groups, are carrying out their activities. They are feeding fat, in terms of exploiting the vacuum. So it's a big problem. Remember that Niger itself is a member of the G5 Sahel, alongside, Mali used to be a member as well. Niger is also a member of the multinational joint task force, which Nigeria, it's also a very strong member of that. Chad is also a member of the multinational joint task force alongside Cameroon and Benin. So the issue now that a lot of people are talking about is once, the jihadists see that all these countries are not agreeing and that these countries are in chaos, they will use this opportunity to recruit more vulnerable people. They would use this opportunity to perhaps, in the worst case scenario that there is a military intervention, they will benefit a lot from the arms that will come as a result of that. They would benefit from the chaos. And the war against insurgency will collapse in the Sahel if there is a military intervention. So right now, it's a very, difficult situation. And I believe that the more reason why we clamor for a peaceful negotiation with the Niger Junta is because we do not want to see the region collapse, not just from a military intervention, but from, terrorist groups, feeling that a vacuum has been created for them to expand their activities.
All right. Well, Mr. David Otto, thank you so much for joining us with your insights on this.
Thank you for having me.